Casual Magic has been brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can get cool stuff. Use the code CASUAL for 5% off your order. We're also sponsored by Quiver Time, makers of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine card-holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their site for 10% off your purchase. And by Architect, a deck hosting website that doesn't sell anything, but they like me and I like them, so kindly use them for all your deck list needs. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. Casual Magic is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., Quiver Time, and Architect. Today, I have a very, very special, really they're all special, but this is part of the brand new season 4 of Casual Magic, where I'm going to be talking to my friends about deck building and cards and stuff. And so today I've brought on a returning guest, my dear friend, Chris, the Commander Mechanic. I love watching his videos, and also the way his brain thinks and the way he looks at deck building makes me very happy and is also very helpful for me to conceptualize things. And so I thought it would be fun to have you come on today and help me work through my problems.
Shivam, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me back. And yes, I am Chris, and I am your Commander Mechanic.
I love watching your videos, and I love that intro. Yeah, dude, like your decks. Yeah, we were talking off camera before about like the fact that you're everybody's Commander Mechanic now. Cause like I've got 2 people who basically will be like, I need you to I've got 3 people basically who I say, you need to look at this deck and tell me what I did wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's you, that's Wheeler, and that's Tim Willoughby. These are like, my brain trust of like entirely different directions of commander building. And it's very, very helpful for me.
Yeah. That whole Commander Mechanic thing started as a gimmick. And, I really started that as like my first video. I say, I'm Chris and I'm your Commander Mechanic. And that was before I had generated the hundreds of videos that I've got out right now, before I've generated the tens of thousands of subscribers on YouTube. And it really started out as a joke, but it's one of those things that I've manifested, I guess, at this point. And just by saying it so often, I have people like yourself, like other people in the community, like lots of friends that come to me at this point and say, I need your help with this deck. Please, I need somebody else's eyes on this deck. And really, it's one of those things that's turned into, I'm actually the internet's Commander Mechanic at this point.
Well, yeah, because like I don't remember who I was talking to. I think I was talking to Jerry T, and he was like, look, man, there's 2 types of people. There's the folks who are deck builders, who are originators, and then there are folks who are deck tuners, right? Mm-hmm. Like people who will take your deck and just kind of rip out the guts, smooth it, speed, like give you some ideas, help you get to that next stage of where you need to go with this thing. And to me, that's like a very important skill and a very useful one at that. Cause like I can come up with an idea. I can come up with a pile of cards. I'm at this point, I've done enough that I'm pretty good at deck building, generally speaking, but I come from a background of writing where I write a crap ton on the paper and I hand it to an editor and I ask them to take a weed whacker to it. And I've realized that my deck building is much the same way. I would really like friends to come and just take weed whackers and kill my, like I remember when you and I first started talking, I was like, hey, I need your help to kind of look at my, I don't even remember what deck it was.
It was your treasures deck that we.
Oh yeah, my treasures deck when we were working on that. And you were like, "All right, before I start, tell me what pet cards I can't start hacking on." And I'm like, "I like you already."
Yeah, exactly. I hold this like "kill your darlings" motto. As well. Like there are a lot of people that have these precious cards within their decks. And sometimes I say, okay, you need an objective opinion on some of this sometimes, but really I've come to this understanding that there are people that build around some of their favorite cards and they don't want to touch those cards. And literally in preparation for this discussion, my number one question for you here is, what are the deck's must-haves?
Yes.
Because I know you very much build around your favorite cards, and whether I feel they belong in the deck or not, or whether they're an issue in the deck or not, I know you're going to say, I'm not touching this one because this is a card that a friend gave me, or this one's an artist proof and I don't want to remove this one. So while I do hold the whole kill your darlings mentality here, I do want to make sure that I'm not gutting something from someone's deck that they enjoy, that sparks joy.
Exactly, because like Commander is like, there's two sides to this format. We both know that there's a efficiency side. There's the side of like, look, I want to play good cards that win, that do the thing I want to do. Like maybe there's a better way to do this effect. And then there's the also, I'm playing this card because it was my favorite card when I was in 4th grade and I don't care. Exactly. It is not the best way to do this effect. It's maybe not even the 15th best way to do this effect. However, it won me a game against Jimmy Sears when I was 12 years old, and that's the end of the story, right?
Yeah, 100%. You know, it might be like you've got this copy of a card that you've had since you started playing, and you've been looking for a deck to put it in, and you finally put it in this deck, and then somebody opens it up and says, oh, you should cut that card.
Oh, dude, it is so, like, okay, look, one thing I used to do is I would give people, like, my friends, like folks like you, I'm like, I would give you a deck blind, and I'd be like, all right, just tell me what you think, or tell me if you see any upgrades or updates. And then people will be like, okay, I want you to take out these X cards. And I'm like, so the cards that I built the deck around, you want me to highlight. And like, I made that mistake once with Brea. When I had built my first Brea deck, I had wanted to build a Thopter themed deck, which just made a ton of Thopter tokens and then use Brea combos to do crazy things. And then when I took it to a friend or like an acquaintance at the time, and he just started hacking through it and cut like every single one of the Thopter makers. Yeah. And it became just a generic good stuff artifacts card. And I'm like, it's a great deck. It wins a lot, but it's also just miserable and not what I want to do.
Strip the soul out of it, right? And that's one of the reasons why when I do tune-ups with people, I have to ask them questions about the deck first. Because when you and I were looking at your Minsk and Boo deck, you sent me that list, and that was very much in the condition that Cadira was in. It was like 130 cards, and you're like, where am I cutting from? Please help me trim this down. And I gave you a few recommendations, and you're like, oh, you know, I really can't cut this card. I really can't cut that card. And I'm like, okay, great. But then we saw each other in Philly, and you handed me the deck. And looking at it in person, I realized why you couldn't cut these cards, because these were signed cards. These were artist proofs. These were cards that you got from friends, like those cherished cards, those real gems and cornerstones of this deck that maybe don't go towards the deck's theme, but are important to you.
They're important to the deck's character, and more importantly, to my emotional happiness, right?
Yes.
Like when you're building a deck, like, because I've got my Tajik deck, Assemble the Legions is in that deck. It is one of my favorite cards of all time. It is one of my pet cards. It is also objectively terrible, right? Like it never pops off. I mean, sometimes it does, but most of the time people are too smart to either let it live, or there's some just random effect that just makes it not, and it's very slow in going. And yeah, there's a lot better things I could be doing with that slot. However, that's the reason the deck exists.
Right.
It's like cutting a Kaldoran outpost out of that. It's like, why would I? No, the whole point. But and like pet cards are so like pet cards make the format, right? Like this is why we play this.
Pet cards are kind of why the format was built too, right? Yeah. Like for finding a use for some of these cards that don't see play anywhere else, being able to identify with your commander, or building a deck around cards in the 99 that you want to find a home for, that you want to use because they spark joy, because they are the things that while playing, you get that dopamine response from just seeing it in play, from just playing it. You know, you get we've played before where you get to attack people with Findhorn elves, or you hand a deck to Rebel and Rebel gets to attack people with Findhorn elves.
Me with my Findhorn
elves. Exactly. But now I can't look at Findhorn elves the same way anymore. And when I see a deck that you've put together that has Findhorn elves in it, I know I am never cutting that card. That has to be in there now, right?
Look, that is about as pet a card as I have, right? Like
Exactly.
it's just a Monodork, but the fact that I was able to force Wizards to print the correct art, and it's maybe my favorite. It's just, and at this point, the game with you and Rebel that you and I we play at every Magic Con
Yeah.
and randomly at every Command Fest or whatever we hang out at is one of my favorite things to do. That's like one of my real, like, just that is a thing we have to do every time now. It's our
Exactly.
tradition.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what, like, that's the beauty about this format, is that it builds these kind of experiences that you can have, and it builds these kind of stories. Like, we love telling stories about the games where we play, and we love just like laughing and commiserating about that. But keep in mind that that's nothing about, like, we come into a game and we try and find out who wins, and we go as hard as we can, and we try
Sure.
and knock each other out. That is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do in those games. And
I mean,
those
like,
decks aren't about that. It's about having fun. It's about generating these stories, right?
it's about subquests, man. It's like when Rebel's got this thing, she will take my Nethroi deck every time and she will try to crush me in the face with it. That is her entire goal, is to destroy me with my own Findhorn Elf. Everything else doesn't matter. It's like, okay, well, when you go into the game with that understanding, you can build around.
Absolutely, and this is what I like to call a success condition, because there are people that build in win conditions to their decks. They build in victory conditions, and those are the people that have the end goal of a game of winning the game or ending the game. But then there's something called a success condition that I call, and that is, if you don't win the game, what do you have to do in the game to enjoy it? What is this deck about, and what is the fun in it? Build something into this deck where if you do the thing in this deck and it doesn't win, you have still enjoyed it. You have still appreciated the work
Yes.
that it took to take that, to have that happen, the success in deck building and putting that together, and
Yes.
having that Rube Goldberg machine go off.
Like that's what I call the your deck did the thing.
Exactly.
Right? Like, yeah, okay, if you win, awesome. We love winning. Winning's great. Everybody gets it. But sometimes you're like, you know what? I just need this combo to happen to just see that it can do it. You know, like, I just want this thing to happen. Let me just do this one thing. I will concede the game afterward. Just let this one thing happen. You know?
Yeah,
I love it.
And those are the kind of games where somebody, like, builds some kind of contraption that can end the game, but what they do is they use it to deck themselves, just to prove that they can, right?
Oh my god. I mean, that's the fun, right? Like, that's the real joy of this. Like, I just want this deck to do a thing. I mean, but it's important to sit down at a table where everybody understands this, because you don't want mismatch expectations. You don't want somebody to be like, I'm trying to win, and you're over here building, a fortress out of shaving cream, and I don't understand what's happening. And, like, if somebody's trying to win, if you're sitting at a table where the other three people are trying to play a good game, don't tank the table.
Right.
Similarly, if you're sitting at a table where people are building sandcastles out of shaving cream, don't bring, like, turn 3 overrun, right? Like, come on.
Read the room, right?
Read the
like
room,
that's a lot of it. And that's, I play a lot with creators, and I play a lot at LGSs and with viewers and fans. And one thing that I've really seen happen now that a lot of people are playing online rather than on person, and have been for the last couple of years, is that kind of communication of what are we looking for out of a game is kind of getting better and better. And the early conversations in a game of Magic about, like, hey, what does your deck do? And people are able to come to the table and say, well, my deck wants to do XYZ, right? And then sometimes you sit down in a pod and there are people that say, okay, your deck wants to do XYZ. Let's see you do XYZ, right? Great. You've done XYZ. I'm going to end the game now. Perfect, right?
I mean, yeah, like, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, that's I think, an entirely reasonable way to play. Like, everybody feels good about it. You walk away from the game and we're like, yeah, that was rad. You know?
People have shown off what their deck can do. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about in-person play, playing at cons, going to the LGS. It's just like, show me what your deck was built to do.
Oh, yeah. Like, it was funny because, like, at Vegas, me and Wheeler sat down to play a game with EK, and was it you?
Yes.
No, yeah, with the Nira deck when we were all sitting there, and like Wheeler didn't have a deck on him, and I was just like, here, man, and he's like, let me see your Nira deck. I wanted to see what the hell this thing you talk about all the time is, and he had the biggest blast in a long time, just because he's like, look, this is just big stupid Timmy things, and that's just not the way he normally builds anymore, and he's like, man, this is just so much fun.
Exactly. And it's that kind of experience. Like, I think you walked away from that with that picture where you and him have the boards with little pyramids of dice on all of the creatures. Like,
it was so good.
Talk about good memories,
dude. The fact that he cloned my vigor, and then our table just got stupid.
Yeah, I think I ended up casting a blasphemous act into the two of you with vigors on boards.
The dumbest. It was so dumb. It was so dumb.
Yeah. It was one of those like punt moments, and trust me, that was a weekend where there were a few games where I just made the worst plays. But that was one of those. Oh, right. You both have vigors on board right now. Yeah. So putting 13 counters on every other creature you have.
I think I even had a doubling season or something in play. So it was just like I've got D20s on every card.
Yeah,
I've used every
had
dice
to ask other people to borrow dice to have enough dice to represent your board state.
It's like I've used every dice in Armed Reach. I don't know what to do now.
You have to talk to strangers and borrow their dice to represent the board state. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting about this Cadira deck. So for those of you who don't know, I have another podcast called Shivam and Wheeler Love Magic. And one of the things we do is that we do a bonus episode every month, where basically a listener will come in and send us a recommendation. Like, here's a commander that I've chosen. Can you guys come up with a deck idea in half an hour? And this time around, I'd picked one because I was like, oh, I remember seeing this as a Baldur's Gate pre-release or something. And I was like, Cadira seems cool. And I know Wheeler likes bunnies. This would be fun. And we sat and we started brainstorming. And the more we realized, the more I was like, I desperately want to build this deck because it sounds delightful. Because what I didn't realize, so I'm going to read Cadira to you for the audience at home. Cadira, Caller of the Small, is a 1 green white for a 3/3 and is Orc Ranger with Trample. And it says, whenever Cadira, Caller of the Small deals combat damage to a player, for each token you control, create a 1/1 rabbit creature token. Which is to say, what I didn't realize was it said for each token, not for each creature token.
Yeah.
Which means if I've got blood on the table, or if I've got food on the table, or if I've got just, I don't know, random like rock tokens or whatever the hell it is, she will just like go off and give me a flock of rabbits. And the more we talked about this, the more I was like, I want to build this into a real ass deck.
Can we take a moment and say 5 years ago, if you were to say, if I have blood on the table, if I have food on the table, none of us would think that we're talking about playing Magic. That's one of those.
Just don't get blood in your food, man. We're okay.
Well, exactly. Oh, I've got blood on the table, and somebody looks at you funny. It's like, oh no, they're tokens. They're tokens in Magic now. I promise.
It's like, oh man, there's food on the table. I thought we're not allowed to bring food or drink in here. No, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, just wait until the Fallout set comes out, and we get Nuka-Cola bottles that we can put on the table. Right? We're gonna have food and drink on the table.
Oh god, yeah, it's gonna be so dumb. But yeah, so the upside here though is that there's no pet card in this deck. I mean, every card is cool and like I like them, but I came to this deck with the pet card I had in mind was literally the commander. And I was like, I want to try like, so my theme idea with this is that I wanted to try to build a tokens deck that is not a standard style tokens deck, which is to say there's not a lot of like, there's no anthem effects, like very few anthem effects. The whole point is not to be like, because rather what I came up with when we were sitting there and we were talking is I realized that this whole thing hinges on Cadira doing damage and doing damage to make more tokens and putting material on the table. And like, I don't know, I got a Halo fountain in there just because it might be fun to use. But what I realized is if we suit her up with a bunch of cool equipment. You have a really neat Voltron commander with like Trailblazer boots or, unblockability or whatever it is. And then you can just go and start slamming in. And then eventually you will just have this infinitely large pile of rabbits that will just come and win the day.
Yeah.
So I wanted to avoid, because like what I thought is, like, this as well as I do, I have a lot of tokens decks. Mm-hmm. In fact, I might have all of my decks are tokens decks.
In one form or another.
Yeah. And so I've done every kind of thing you could do with tokens, except leave them just raw as material.
Right.
So I was like, what if the tokens weren't the point this time? What if they were just the support structure?
Yeah. And I think that that's very interesting because you've built out a few things already in this list that do exactly that make use of the tokens that aren't just, this is my victory condition. Right. Things like Cadira in here, where suddenly all of your tokens are
Monor Rocks. Exactly.
Right? Like using those tokens for something other than just attacking is great. But then also you go wide enough and suddenly, okay, great. I'll end the game with the 1,000 tokens that I've created. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that is fantastic. Being that you've built the deck around the commander is something a little bit different to what you and I normally discuss.
Very different.
Yeah, you normally build around a concept for the entire deck and then sometimes work backwards to the commander in that. But starting with Cadira here, we know that she's going to be the focus of the deck. And I absolutely love these kind of brainworm commander decks where you see a concept for a deck or you see a commander and suddenly they're in your ear and suddenly you are compelled to build these decks, right?
Exactly.
Those are great. Sometimes I'll have comments on YouTube videos or I'll have somebody tweet at me and they bring up like, hey, what about this card with this card? And I'll be like, ooh, okay, that's interesting enough that I could build something around that.
Exactly.
And I have to build. Like I get this compulsion sometimes to brew. And it's rare for me where I brew a deck and I like it so much on paper and while goldfishing that I'm like, okay, I have to put this together. I absolutely
exactly what happened to me. Like we're just sitting there. We do this monthly. We go grab a commander and we just come up with like ideas and shoot them on down. Normally it's just like it's a hypothetical, just like, oh, that's a cool little thought worm or whatever. This time around, I was like, ironically enough, I don't have a Selesnya deck. I've never and I've got all these Selesnya cards I've always wanted to just find a home for. Mm-hmm. There was a card that came out in Dominaria, Queen Alanal of Rudok, which is like, if you make one or more creature tokens, you also make a white soldier token.
Yeah.
Or like all of these like Farmer Cotton that was in the stupid Cotton. Lord of the Rings deck, which was like when it enters the battlefield, you make X1/1 white halflings and food tokens.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that's like Cadira just like dying over here. And I just had all these cards that I was like, I would love to find a home for. Like one of the ones that Wheeler told me about that just blew my mind because nobody ever remembers the new Capenna commander decks. Is there's an artifact called Scepter of Celebration, which is 2 and a green for an artifact equipment that equipped creature gets +2/+0 and trample, which again aids with her actually hitting.
Yeah.
But then it says when it deals combat damage, you make that many 1/1 green and white citizens, and I'm like,
those words.
Oh my God, what
is? Yeah, exactly. Anytime something says make that many, like there's a Wand of Orcus. It's a black
card. I love that card.
That's when the equipped creature deals combat damage, make that many 2/2 zombies. Anything in Commander that says make that many is incredible. Yes. And in this, it's exactly what you want. This is basically you get to triple your board presence or quadruple your board presence.
It's insane. It's so silly. It's so dumb to think about. And like that's the thing that got me is there's so many cards in here that I've just ignored or just not ignored, but like, they're just not the thing I'm looking for that are suddenly just gas, like suddenly pure gas.
Those are like the hidden treasures that I love finding. Like you would never search up these cards on their own unless you're building a deck around the concept. It's these cards that fit perfectly into what you're trying to build that sometimes are just like, this is a Goldilocks card. It is just right for what I'm trying to build right now. And those are the, suddenly this is my favorite card ever. Right? These aren't the I have them on my desk and they're waiting for a deck. These are the I have never heard of this card before, but my God, do I need a copy of it right now?
Boy, was this the exact there were two cards that came up that just stunned me when I was looking at them because when you look at it's weird. There's this commander lens that comes over you. When you look at a card and you've got a commander that you're working on or something, suddenly this card takes an entirely different shape, right? There are cards that are just like, oh, I don't care. And suddenly it's like, oh my God, this is there's a card, Bloodforged Battle Axe, which is like a card that came out a million years ago. And I was like, it was in one of the commander decks even. And I looked at this, I'm like, this seems so stupid. It's a 1-mana equipment with +2/+0. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a token copy of Bloodforged Battle Axe. And I was like, that seems dumb. Why would you care? And now I'm looking at Cadira and I'm like, oh my God, she hits, makes another token, and that's another bunny, and you can equip it. And then do you remember the Monor Rocks Skyclave relic from Zendikar or whatever?
The one that you can kick to make multiple copies of.
It's an indestructible monolith, so who cares? Fine. But you pay extra 3 mana for kicker, and suddenly you get 2 indestructible tokens. That is guaranteed.
Yeah, and that is everything that this deck wants.
It's
and
so
you bring up 3 mana rocks, and I've got to give kudos to the game designers right now, because they are printing all of these incredible incentivized 3 mana rocks that have some kind of effect to them that are perfect in a lot of decks. I know a lot of people, and a lot of people will come to me and say, why would I ever play a 3 mana rock over a 2 mana rock? We're spoiled for choice when it comes to 2 mana rocks. And I show them a 3 mana rock that is literally perfect for the deck concept that they're trying to build. And suddenly that light bulb moment goes off, and they're like, oh, that's why I'd play it, because it synergizes with what I'm doing as opposed to just being baseline good.
Right. That's one of the things I think Wizards has really taken a lot of they've learned a lot and they've listened to us, because they made Arcane Signet. Before Arcane Signet, people were using Monolith, people were using Chromatic Lantern, whatever random 3 mana rocks you had, Coalition Relics. And then Arcane Signet comes out, suddenly everybody's on 2 mana rock land, everybody's playing Talismans, everybody's playing Thought Vessel, all these random crap cards, because they're just faster and untapped. And now they're like, okay, well, what if we made 3 mana rocks that didn't suck?
Right. What if we made Strixhaven Stadium?
Or
what if
we
made
Midnight Clock?
Exactly.
Or Cursed Mirror.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, just they just came out the white one, which is tap to give all your creatures the next creature you cast gets Convoke.
Yeah.
Or the black one I don't know, whatever it is. They've finally figured out that, hey, if we make 3 mana rocks that don't suck, maybe we can slow the format down and also have fun still.
Yeah, the one that they just released is Progenitor's Icon. I have a copy of it here. It's the from the Ixalan Commander decks. It's a 3 mana rock, but you choose a creature type when it enters the battlefield, and you can also tap it to give the next creature of the chosen type flash that you cast.
Oh, that's real good.
So, oh yeah, real good. So, there are a lot of typal decks out there that need this. Imagine flashing in your Gishath commander at the end of turn, right?
That.
Right. Those are the kind of things that you can do now, and that's the reason why you look outside of just here's my staple mana base for these things. Sure, I'm going to put in my talismans, and I'm going to put in my arcane signets and my soul rings, but also leave room for a couple of those 3 mana rocks that fit into your deck's concept.
Very much.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, if you are brainstorming a deck, where do you start?
Oh, a lot of the times I will focus on a core synergy when I'm putting a deck together. A lot of the time, more often than not, I start with a synergy with the commander. So what do I want the commander doing? And that's largely because the commander is the most consistent part of your deck. You always have access to it. And if you build around what the commander can do or what the commander can enable, then you are going to have less of a chance of a non-game where you don't do the thing, because you're building around your commander. If you build around an interaction in the 99, then you have to find all of the cards for the interaction. You have to include tutors or copious card draw. And that's when you get into situations that might not be fun for the table of, every other turn you're casting a tutor or you're jamming Ristic Study into every deck just so you draw enough cards that you can find the interaction. So when I'm starting, I tend to look at the commander and what I want the commander to do. But there are instances where all work bottom up rather than top down. And these are some design terms that Wizards uses when designing cards. Top down is typically working from a concept down and building what a card does based on what you want it to build around. Look at a lot of the Battle for Baldur's Gate cards, for instance. But then there's bottom up, where you know what a card is going to do and you build what it is around that. And building from the bottom up deck-wise is, here's what I want the deck to do. Let's reverse engineer what the commander is going to be from here.
Like, my building style is almost always top down, right? Like, I always start with a theme or a fundamental idea or concept for the deck, and then I build it's like writing an essay. I've got my thesis sentence, and then I build the essay around that sentence. My soldiers deck, obviously the theme is making soldier tokens. My zombies deck, whatever. It's like I'm very, very easy to read. This time around is one of the first few times in a while that I've been like, I've got a mechanical concept where I want to Voltron in and I want to have just a bunch of crap on the table, and I'm trying to build a bottom up theme. So I'm not like, nothing has to be like, I don't care that there's, okay, that's not true. Let me correct myself. There were 2 cards that are absolute stone cold perfect for this that I did not put in here because they would have broken my soul. And that is, one was the saga that came from Lord of the Rings called of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, where you put a 1/1 counter on target creature, make a food, and then you draw a card and create food, and then you make a 1/1 halfling for each food you control. And I was like, Cadira creates rabbits. She does not eat rabbits.
Right.
And I was like, I don't care
friend of the small.
I'm like, I don't care how perfect this card is. It's not going to happen. Similarly, there was a card, Stew the Conies. It's like, it's deal damage to power equal to your power to a creature you don't control, and then make a food token. I'm like, great, a fight spell. But there's no conies being stewed here. That's not happening.
Exactly. And those are great little thematic choices in there, where somebody will come to you from complete outside, not having talked to you about this deck, and they say, oh, card would be great for this, and then name those cards.
Yeah, I did. So many people have been like, dude, you got to get these, like, the frying pan, or I'm like, no, I can't.
Yeah, we are not eating our friends here. This is a fully vegan deck.
Yeah, rabbits are friends, not food. That's how this works.
Amazing. Man.
Yeah, but like, I don't know. And then I just got excited, and I was like, who would be helpful to help me weed whack this thing to size? And I thought of you, because you are very good at this.
My friend, that is what I am here for. So let me turn the tables on this a little bit, and let me ask you some questions about this. So you've already answered a couple of questions for me. Cadira is really the build around.
Yes.
Here, right? So we are starting with Cadira. That means Cadira is likely going to be what we're jamming on turn 3 every time. Yes?
That's a hope.
Fantastic. Well, so the success condition here is that we want to create copious amounts of tokens. We just want to go as wide as possible with tokens. We want Cadira to slam in and make more tokens every time. Yes?
Yes.
Fantastic. So in that case, with very few must-haves in the deck, are we looking to ensure that when Cadira is attacking, you already have tokens on board? Is that ideal?
I mean, ideally you would want that, right? But really, like, you need to start somewhere. So you do need to have at least some seed. You need to have some seed tokens in order for Cadira to start her engine, right? Because she can't make bunnies unless there's tokens on the table.
Exactly.
So you need to have something, which is why I went and I found there was a ramp spell or something that I found. It's weird because like I was looking at, the thing that's interesting about this deck is that it's making me look at cards that I had forgotten existed because they're just normally too bad to play in Commander. Like Scout the Wilderness, the ramp card from Dominario, which is like 2 and a green to put a basic land into play tapped. but if you kick it for 1 and a white, you also get a couple of soldier tokens.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, Cadira wants that. That's perfect.
Right. Or even something like Colony Garden, which
yes,
used
Colony
to be,
Garden is exactly it.
Yeah, it used to be a staple of the format. Like every deck used to have Colony Garden in it just to start off with a token in play. Just that 0/1 plant. But in this, if your turn 1 land is that comes into play tapped, green generating land that makes a token, you know that when Cadira is attacking, you have at least 1 bunny coming.
Exactly. That's the thing. Like, Colony Garden is one of my favorite just cards in general. Just like historically, it's such a doofy little card that does so much. It just comes into play, gives you a 0/1. Then that 0/1 has got infinite value.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I feel like people cut it from the format unnecessarily. That card's still good.
Right. And I mean, like, you and I, who have been playing the format for as long as we have, look back on it with some rose-colored glasses in some instances and say,
look,
hey,
it is just a tap land that makes it donkey. But that's not the point, though. It's like here it's like slam dunk perfect.
Exactly. And like those 3-mana rocks that we were talking about, sometimes you find a card that people don't even pay attention to, but you find the right synergies in the right deck where those synergies work enough that it's worth the inclusion. And in this case, it's a tap land, but it's another bunny when Cadira connects. And that's basically what it says, is this is a tap land that makes you 2 tokens rather than 1.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there were cards I was looking at for this that just I had completely forgotten about because they're trash in a lot of formats that are suddenly like really fascinating here. Like, did you play much Brothers War?
Yes, I did.
So in Brothers War, there was a card called Great Desert Prospector, which is a 4 and a white 3/2 human artificer, and it was like medium bad card in like limited or whatever, because who cared about a 5-mana 3/2? And it says when it comes into play, create a tapped Power Stone for each other creature you control.
Yep.
That is effectively doubling your tokens for like. And artifacts don't go away very easily in EDH, so they're just going to sit there. So you'll always have some kind of fodder. Yeah, and I was like, this is so dumb. I love it.
With the equipment that you have in this deck as well, those Power Stones aren't sitting there not doing anything.
Right, exactly.
Those Power Stones can pay to move your equipment around.
Actually, honestly, I didn't even think about that. That didn't even occur to me. That seems actually really good now.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things when they released Power Stones as a token type, everybody was like, okay, look at all of the restrictions on this. You can't use it to cast spells. You can only use it to activate abilities and artifacts and whatnot. But Brothers War has so many of these artifacts that have activated abilities, so many equipment in it, and it's perfect for that. And in this, where you've got that artifact sub theme, making Power Stones is actually pretty
kind of hot, right? Like,
yeah, right?
Yeah. I mean, now that you mentioned that actually seems like a pretty ridiculously strong synergy here. Like, I had only thought about this because it just makes such a quantity of tokens.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, there's just a lot of value to just having extra tokens on the table.
Yeah. Well, there's this old saying that in a game of Magic, the player who spends the most mana wins.
Sure.
And when you're making Power Stones that are suddenly making your equip costs free, and when all of your tokens are tapping for mana, so something like a Jaheira comes down and you're casting an 8-mana spell while all of your opponents are casting a 4-mana spell, right? Like you're in the green there, literally and figuratively.
Exactly that. And I was just like, this seems so perfect. And again, that's another one of the reasons that I was really enjoying this build as I was going through it, is because it's giving me a new look on the way like Magic works. Yep. Like, just it lets me stare at these cards from an entirely different angle than I normally do, and it's super delightful. Like, there was this garbage artifact equipment from I think it was VOW that was called Ceremonial Knife. Mm-hmm. Which, whenever this creature deals combat damage, create a blood token. And I was like, sold. Let's go. Cadira's going to just run around with a little dagger and just poke people and collect. I mean, I don't know if I like that picture very much in my head of her making blood tokens, but you know what? Tokens is tokens. We don't complain.
Yeah, stack your triggers right, and suddenly you're making a blood, and then you're making an extra bunny on that. Yeah.
Bloody bunnies. Let's go. Maybe we should be stewing some conies. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. the problem, of course, is that like every commander deck, it's very easy to say, oh, this card would be great. And then very hard to be like, this card would be less great than those other 30 great cards.
Right. Which is why you call in the expert like me to say, hey, look, some of these cards that you have in here, let's consider whether they work with the overall deck. Right. And that's what I get. You won't believe the number of people that come to me with like 150 card decks saying, help me make cuts. And look, I just got off of the back of my November series where I brewed 30 decks in 30 days. And let me tell you, there were a couple of days where I was down to 102 cards in a deck, and I was just absolutely sweating about where to make these last two cuts to get these decks ready and out the door, right? And look, even for somebody like me who reviews other people's decks, builds hundreds of decks a year, those last few cuts are agony. They really are.
I call those the Ultra Pro cuts because your box comes with 102 sleeves in it usually, and when you count people's decks, they're always at like 101, 103 cards just because they put every card, there's a sleeve for it, I'm going to put a card in there. And it's like, those are the ones that you really ought to cut, but we can't, and there's a sleeve, so I have an excuse to just kind of cheat.
Exactly. And our friend Jim from the RC says, hey, look, nobody's counting your decks at these games. If you want to run 103 cards, run 100.
It's a nebulous kind of, it's a suggestion more.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you're having fun, that's what matters.
But I do want to talk about one of your favorite cards and one of my favorite cards of all time. That was like the first card I put into this deck when I was building it. And that is, of course, one of the greatest cards ever printed, Academy Manufactor.
Oh, God, I love it so much.
Like the pet card of pet cards, which has text, but effectively says, if you create a clue, food, or treasure, instead create one of each.
Oh,
like what a great card! What a
hands down one of my favorite cards of all time.
Oh,
and it's
really
easy. Weird to think that a card that's been released just within the last year or two has skyrocketed up in the 20 plus year history of me playing this game as one of my favorite cards ever. But the whole thing is that my love for this card was sparked by the rules notes for Modern Horizons. And it said, if you somehow managed to create 18 copies of Academy Manufactor, every time you would create a food token or clue, you would create, and then there was a mathematic formula attached to that of how many tokens you would create. And I took that as a challenge, and immediately thought to myself, okay, how can I make this crazy? How can I, make a dozen copies of Academy Manufactor? And suddenly I need to break out a calculator mid-game to show people how many tokens I was creating.
Okay, I'm going to read the Oracle text because it is like Matt Tabak at his finest, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you control one Academy Manufactor and would create some number of clue, food, or treasure tokens, you will instead create that many clue, food, and treasure tokens. If you control two Academy Manufactors and would create some number of clue, food, or treasure tokens, you will instead create 3 times that many clue, 3 times that many food, and 3 times that many treasure. If you control 18 Academy Manufactors, I don't know, you figure it out, you would create some number of clue, food, and if you would create some number of food, clue, or treasure tokens, you will instead create 129,140,163 times that many clue tokens, 129,140,163 times that many food tokens, and 129,140,163 times that many treasure tokens.
Oh, when that was released, I reached out to Matt and I said, bet. I will do this. You said you figure it out, and I said,
I will.
That is what I will do. And I spent maybe the next month putting together a deck that did exactly that. And I managed to pull it off. Just making clones and copying Academy Manufactor, or doing something like Sakashima's Will, where every creature you control becomes the copy of the creature you control. And then just making a single treasure and pulling out that calculator and saying, okay, I am making X million of each token right now. Oh, I tweeted at him the picture of the aftermath of these, because I have never had something speak to me so deeply as a brewer, as a builder, someone who loves a challenge, as much as that you figure it out in that rules text.
It's like, oh, okay, buddy. It's on now.
You have opened that can of worms.
What the hell was that? There was a commander, the blue-red commander, who at the beginning of your upkeep or something changes any token to be every token, or like every token you have to be the copy of one target token?
Brutclad, which is
Brutclad.
Let me show you one of my favorite active decks is Brutclad.
Brutclad is so much fun.
Oh god, one of the reasons why I fell in love with Brutclad wasn't because of Academy Manufacturers, actually because of Wheeler, because I sat down to play Wheeler, and he pulled out his Brutclad 7 Dwarves deck.
Yeah.
Where he wants to make a token of 7 Dwarves and then turn every token he controls into a 7 Dwarves. And managed to pull it off and created something like 18 or 27 Dwarves tokens. And I was like, okay, Brutclad can do some crazy stuff. Thanks for showing me the capability of this. I want to see what I can do out of this.
Every Brutclad deck I've ever seen has been just either the most heinous pile or just like some ridiculous Johnny combo. Yeah. And it's so good. It's so delightful. And it does so many stupid things.
Yeah. And I love to see the things that people will put the effort into doing. Like we talked about seeing other people's decks and being in a game and wanting to see what the deck does, what the thing is. Being able to be like, okay, you're running a Brutclad deck. Great. How many copies are you making of what? Because there are people that'll be completely mundane and just say, I want to make as many copies of Soul Ring as possible. Fantastic. That's great. Then there are people that will say, I want to make as many copies of a Smaug token as possible so that they all blow up and create 13 treasures. And the next turn, I turn all of those treasures into copies of Smaug and have them all blow up into more treasure tokens.
Like, I love everything. Every word you're saying is music to my ears. And plus, the Smaug token just looks so cool.
Oh, it really does. Like maybe my favorite
part of any token. Oh my god, I want to build that now. It's like I want that deck. But yeah, like Brutclad is like kind of the template I was going for. I'm like, what if I made a Selesnya Brutclad deck?
Yeah, and you've got some real good parts in here. Like, I mean, we could go card by card and just say how perfect these cards are for this deck. But you didn't bring me on just to rant and rave about how good some of these cards are. It turns out
I was looking at my numbers, and the audience really likes it when I bring people on to just sit and talk about piles of cards while laughing and smiling. And I was like, all right, well, if that's what you want.
and look, there are some fantastic cards in this deck. But when you're looking at 125 cards, you really have to start asking yourself, where are the cuts made? Yeah. Where do we start trimming this down to where it's a playable pile, right? And
yeah, you're right. No, you're right. Because like there was one card that I did want to mention that I was like, oh, this card would be like, I kind of want to keep this one, and that's Best Soul Nourisher, who is also 1 green white. And for a 1/1, and whenever one or more creatures with base power toughness 1/1 enter the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on Bess. And then whenever Bess attacks, each other creature you control with base power and toughness 1/1 gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on her.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like, I wanted to keep that there because me and Wheeler were like theorizing when we were building this deck, like she works with weenie 1/1s. Mm-hmm. This deck shoots out weenies like just like a cannon at a baseball game, right? And like, it's just, it struck me as that would be the most hilarious kind of overrun where all these unassuming little bunnies just suddenly gigantify because of how much stuff is on Best.
Yeah, and you'll note that it is much more synergistic than something like a Crater Hoof. Just slamming a Crater Hoof into the deck, anybody can slam a Crater Hoof into any deck. That's fine. But when you say, my Crater Hoof is Best Soul Nourisher,
yeah,
then, it's something different, it's something unique, and it's something synergistic in the deck. Right? Yes. We just got Cloud Shaker Cavalry as well, the white version of Crater Hoof too. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people might say, hey, for your win con, slam Crater Hoof, slam Cloud Shaker, whatever it might be in there. But I like the idea of, Best Soul Nourisher is my overrun effect. It's synergistic. It's something that starts getting scary on its own. And then when somebody realizes, oh, you have a dozen bunnies and Bess is 12/12, and suddenly those are attacking, it gets a little bit scarier. It gets a little bit more fun, right?
Exactly that.
Yeah. Now, when we're looking at the deck and when we're looking at what it's doing, knowing that Cadira is our build around here, um, and knowing that we really want to be casting Cadira on turn 3 so that she's attacking on turn 4, there are a few things that we really want to keep in mind from a deck build standpoint. And, this is where I'm going to invoke some Kill Your Darlings in here, but we really need to look at the structure of the deck in terms of what's creating tokens before Cadira is coming down versus what are the 3-cost cards that we're okay casting on later turns because we're taking turn 3 or a 3-mana slot to cast Cadira every game. Right? So these are where I would start in our assessment. Right? Are we casting anything on turn 1 or 2 that isn't making us a token? Right? Because if we're casting something on turns 1 and turns 2, knowing that on turn 3 Cadira is coming down, it means that we will need to have something that we're casting on turn 4 before we attack with Cadira to make tokens so that she's making tokens. So the more that we can put in at the 1 and 2 mana value range that make tokens to begin with are great. So something like Legion's Landing, for instance, 1 mana, enters, makes a vampire. Great. We're looking at things at 1 and 2 mana that need to be making tokens.
Sure. Right? Like that's also why I put in my maybe board the idea of a Thraben Inspector, for instance, which is not a card that you see in Commander very often. But in this case, it's providing seed money for Cadira to start rolling with.
Exactly. And even the new Kellen that you put into, that's just 1 mana, make X maps.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like those are the kind of things that we want to be seeing. We want to be seeing these 1 mana and 2 mana token generators so that we can start rolling with Cadira, right? Anything that is at that mana value that makes a token is exactly where we want to be. And looking at the new Charismatic Conqueror, for instance, right? First of all, shame on you for putting a stacks piece in here.
But I do that a lot. Like I end up with things like I put Thalia in a deck, or I put whatever, and they're like, "Why are you playing stacks?" I'm like, "No, I'm just playing a soldier token. I don't know what you're talking about." It's like,
right, exactly.
It slows you down a smidge, but whatever.
Well, in this case, this is like the loosest version of stacks that you can include because it's entirely optional. And if we know anything about options that you give Commander players, they are always going to take the option that benefits them. So in this case, they're going to say, "My Soul Ring is going to come into play untapped. You can have that vampire token. I don't care." Right?
Exactly.
So Charismatic Conqueror is perfect for what we're looking at here because if you can jam this early enough in the turn cycle, you can be untapping with 3 or 4 vampires ready to go because that it comes down when people are jamming their Monor Rocks, when people are starting to set up for turns. I mean, this might even be artifact lands that people are playing that they don't tap.
Oh my god, dude! In my treasure deck, I run the artifact lands from Urza's, whatever from Mirrodin, and I had somebody with blind obedience or something in play, or Thalia, and it was like, "Oh yeah, your artifacts all come into play tapped." I'm like, "Yeah," and it's like, "Those are artifacts, buddy." And I'm like, "No!"
Yeah, it's maddening when somebody turns all of your lands into slow lands. Right?
Oh god, it's like, come on.
Yeah, it's
the losing your stuff to like an inadvertent Vandal Blast and just getting your table Armageddon is like, I brought that on myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Earlier this year, I built a colorless all artifacts deck with Graz, the Juggernaut from All-Will-Be-One. And I would sit down and in pregame discussions, I would say, all right, if anybody's running Vandal Blast, please, I beg of you, do not cast at this game. Otherwise, it is a non-game for me here because everything I'm running is an artifact from my lands through to my rocks, through to my creatures. It's all artifacts. So I would have some people sit down and then immediately start going through their deck and pulling out the Vandal Blast and just being like, okay, I will not be casting that this game. Great. Thank you for the heads up.
I mean, look, dude, now I realize that's a controversial statement, and there's sometimes don't change your, I'm not telling you need to change your deck for everybody else at the table, but it's a real zero conversation. Like, look, my deck functions because of these things, and if you take away this game plan, I have literally no game.
Right.
And so you can just take the win and we can just do something else. But it's like, be considerate. If you want to have a game, it's all casual, it's all fun. Now, mind you, if this isn't something you want to do, that's okay. You don't have to sit down to the game. The choice is there. That's what the conversation is for. Like, it's like my Nethroid deck. I learned early on, like, I'm like, oh, if my Nethroid gets control magic when it's on like a big mutate pile, I'm done.
Yeah.
And that's why I started putting, but I'm not going to ask you to not like try to destroy my commander because that's dumb.
Exactly.
But I started putting in like fail safes. But like, if your deck is entirely enchantments or entirely artifacts or entirely something, it's like, look, your incidental wrath it's like Iona. It's like your incidental card is going to lock me out of the game entirely. Mm-hmm. And that's just not fun.
Is that really the vibe that we want out of this game? And that's the conversation to have. It's like, hey, look, you can make the choice to have me not play this game anymore. Great. If that's the spirit that we want to play with, fantastic. I'm not going to make you not cast a card. I'm not going to twist your arm to do something. But, if you want this to be sporting, if we want to have fun, great. Otherwise, that's going to come down and I might just like, okay, I can't play anymore. Like I literally can't cast anything anymore. Yeah. Like there are going to be instances where that happens. And sometimes you just take the L on those. Sometimes you just shuffle up and play the next game. Great.
Exactly.
But if you're playing with people and they're considerate enough to say, okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. I won't, exile your graveyard. I want to see what your deck can do. Let's do the thing. I'm not going to lock you out of the game. That's great. Sometimes you have pods that will say, yep, fine by me. Let's see what you can do. Sometimes there are people that will say, okay, I'm going to make you work for this. So I'm going to slow you down. I'm going to set you back considerably.
Sure.
All of those are perfectly fine. All of those are perfectly valid options.
Yeah. Like I think that there is that argument to be made where it's like, look, man, if your deck is all one note, you should be able to build some way to protect yourself. Or like, I'm not going to not play removal just so that you like, if you're going to start going out of control and you're telling me I can't play my Vandal Blast, that's not very fair. Yeah. But like, I mean, there's tone involved and there's nuance involved and there's feeling the tenor of the table. What are we here to do? Yeah. Who are we playing with? And that's the sort of thing that communication helps you fix.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having that discussion up front means that everybody can have a rewarding game. And when you start getting that mindset of, I want to sit down and I want everyone to have fun, as opposed to, it's about me. I want to have fun alone. I don't care about what everybody else is doing. I don't want to see what everybody else has come up with. I don't want to see those brews. I just care about point A to point B for this. Then the conversation needs to be around that before the game starts. And
sure.
That's when that discussion comes into play and say, I'm going to try and shut you down at every instance. My deck is full of interaction. If you expect your commander to stay on the board, expect me to remove it. Right? Those are the kind of discussions and the kind of mindsets that need to be clearly communicated at the outset for everybody to enjoy.
Sure. And it's just like, I mean, that's fair. It's entirely reasonable. And like, I don't want to take away your fun. If your deck is made to dismantle mine, that fine. That either I'll play a different deck or I will deal with it. Well, like yeah. I sat down at this table. This is my deck. I'm going to take responsibility for my actions, right? Like
exactly. And that is the choice as well. Keep in mind that you are in control as anyone else too.
Yeah.
And that means, either, somebody's playing a deck that is in direct opposition to yours. Great. Do you still want to play that deck? If the person who's playing the deck that's in opposition to yours is dead set on playing that, maybe switch up the deck. If you want to play the deck that you sat down to play and you know that somebody's trying to shut you down, say you're playing this Cadira deck against somebody who is like mono board wipes in this, then,
oh God.
Then maybe you pick up and you find another pod where people are more amenable to it.
Or like, first turn they dark ritual out, one of those things where it's like, all the creatures get -1/-1. I'm like, well, GG's, I guess.
Exactly. You get something like an illness in the ranks where all creature tokens get -1/-1, right?
Karavek or something like that. And you're just like, well,
yeah,
GG's me, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's when you've got to say, okay, great. Do I have to dig for my removal for this? Yeah. Do I have to find that aura shards to remove that enchantment? Do I have to find my swords to plowshares to get rid of that Karavek?
Aura shards in this deck would be filthy. That's why I think that's one of the reasons why I don't play that card anymore, because it is so indiscriminately powerful.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying it's a bad card. It's very good, but it's just like at the tiers I enjoy playing at, I find that it causes more unhappiness than it helps me out.
Yeah, and that's it, like it's not a stacks piece and it's not a lock piece, but in the right deck with the right synergies, it's very much your opponents cannot have artifacts or enchantments
Oh yeah.
anymore. And a lot of the time that doesn't feel good, at least to me, in my opinion, to say, you know, uh, your opponents have probably built their decks where 30% of their deck is artifacts or enchantments at this point. Do you really want to say you're not getting more than one turn with that artifact or enchantment in play?
Well, what I realized is like the thing that really set me straight on that was because I was playing against a friend of mine who was playing a vehicles deck, and he was playing a vehicles deck, and I just had an aura shards ambiently because I was like, oh look, someone might try to nuke one of my enchantress, or like someone might try to put a lockdown, and I just need a defensive power. And it's like, yeah, you think that's defensive. I look at that as if I play anything, I'm going to lose the game. And I was like, that's not the feeling I want to engender in a commander game. So I'm just going to replace that with like a force of vigor or something and call it a day.
Right. The one-time interaction is better because, in my opinion, not only does it foster that spirit of people can do what they're trying to do with a deck, and I'm not going to necessarily prevent them from doing anything at all, but including one-time removal in a deck, like you've got aura mutations in this list rather than aura shards, for instance, because it's a synergistic piece of removal that does basically the same thing and creates tokens. But also, one-time removal has better stories to it too. Like it creates these better gameplay interactions where, oh, you just happen to have that answer in hand rather than aura shards has been sitting on the table for 5 turns. If I cast this enchantment, it's going to die. Where if I cast this game-winning enchantment and you're holding on to aura mutation, it's just that, oh, he had the answer, right?
Yep, exactly that. And it's like, I believe that people should be running more single target removal anyways. It's just that it's more targeted, it's more specific, and it's less just indiscriminate than like a Wrath or a board wipe or whatever.
Yeah. I released a video a few weeks ago about removal in Commander in particular, and why things like board wipes in Commander, especially absolutely generic board wipes that are symmetrical, that wipe everybody's boards, are typically negative tempo for the player casting the board wipe. And that's one of those concepts that a player is just going to like slam a damnation or a wrath of God or a blasphemous act or a vanquish the hordes and set everybody back. But then they're shipping the turn and letting all of their opponents rebuild first. So you really got to think to yourself, is it worth wiping everybody's boards, or is it worth doing something like a sculptable board wipe? Is it worth doing a citywide bust and just taking out everything with high toughness, especially in a list like Cadira, for instance, where you know everything is going to be relatively small? Or
did you see the racks that we put in here? Battle of Bywater, which is the 1 white, destroy a creature power 3 or greater, and then make a food for each creature you control. So it both advances my position and gets everything bigger than a hobbit off the table.
Exactly. And like we were talking about the synergistic 3 mana rocks, the synergistic board wipes that we've been seeing print, played, and designed lately are just absolutely incredible. A lot of people lean on those like classic 4 mana board wipes like the Wrath of Gods or the Damnations, but you can run a lot of like 3 mana half board wipes that are not going to set you back as much as everybody else at the table, but they also don't nuke everybody back to the Stone Age.
Right, exactly that.
Yeah, and those are what I would much rather include in these decks, because you can wipe out your opponent's big blockers and leave all of your attackers still in play. And swing in and get the hit from Cadira and make even more tokens while taking out some of those big threats that were maybe going to fly over your tokens or were going to trample over your little 1/1 chump blockers.
Right. That's a good point. I forgot all about trample. That's a real humdinger for this deck. Did you see that I found, like, in speaking of random cards that are like old and forgotten. There was a saga from Call Time called Battle of Bredegard, which was like make a 1/1 human warrior, then a 1/1 elf warrior, and then step 3 is choose any number of artifact or creature tokens you control with different names, and then make a copy of it. And I was like, that seems hilarious. In this deck where every token is going to be just some kind of weirdo.
Yeah.
Like
when you have blood and food and clues and treasures and rabbits, like
and
exactly,
indestructible skyclaves or whatever.
Yeah, that thing reaches its 3rd tier, and suddenly you're making a dozen more tokens.
Yeah,
and that's happening before Cadira is attacking too. So like this is definitely one of those decks where you're just going to go wide with tokens, and they aren't necessarily going to be the same token either, which is good, which is fun. Like this is not a rabbit deck. You are not specifically making bunny tokens here. You're making any kind of token, and then bunnies on top of that.
Yeah, it's like it's gonna be bunnies and squirrels and sapperlings and eggs and who knows what the hell is going on here. It's just It's gonna be a pile of just stuff.
You're gonna have your little petting zoo out here of all of these little things.
Do you know what card I found when I was looking for things? Ant Queen. You remember Ant Queen?
Yeah, Ant Queen, Cube Superstar.
I had forgotten all about this. I got it in a draft for Modern Masters 2015 or some crap, whatever. And I was just like, oh yeah, Ant Queen just makes insects for like a 1 and a green or something. Go in there, buddy. You're just sitting around doing nothing.
Absolutely. And late in the game, when you've got an excess of mana, this is just, maybe the board's been wiped. You drop an Ant Queen and suddenly you've built up that token horde just by pumping some extra mana into it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that is kind of a sensitive question that people ask. What do you think about silver border cards showing up in random commander decks? Because one of the cards that I wanted to build this deck around was Earl of Squirrel, which I happen to have from Unstable or whatever, which was 4 green for a 4/4 Squirrel Advisor with Squirrel Link that says damage dealt by this creature also creates that many 1/1 green squirrel tokens. Creature tokens you control are squirrels in addition to their other types, and all the squirrels you control get +1/+1, which is okay. Like I know I said I don't want anthems, but at the same time, Squirrel Link.
Yeah. No, and when it comes to silver bordered cards, there are some that are innocuous enough that I will not bat an eyelash at.
Right.
There are some that are just like, okay, this is getting a little too wacky. This is like pushing the border of things, like Infinity Elemental or Animate Library, which are two of my favorite recent silver bordered cards in here. This one is exactly what the deck wants to do. But it is something that you are going to have to ask people, hey, are you okay with this? Because this is one of those cards that also can go a little crazy in a deck like this.
Oh, it can go it can get nutty, as it
were. Personally, I'd be okay sitting down next to it. What I would likely say is don't expect that to stay on the board very long, right?
Well, I mean, because the card it's broken, it's busted, man. It makes, and especially in this deck where you've got so many equipment that are giving you invulnerability or some kind of like just protection, you could swing in there and making just a grip full of squirrels is.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't expect it to live very long. It's an insanely powerful card. However,
you get one swing out of this thing, and it has more than paid for itself.
Oh yeah. But that's also it. I was like, you know what? I've been sitting on this card for literal years on my desk looking for some place to put it.
You and every other Commander player that has silver bordered cards sitting somewhere saying, I wish I could play this card. I wish I could put this one in the deck.
That is one of the things that irritates me so much. That is like one of my pet peeves is people who are and it's not people. It's the fact that the Commander Rules Committee, no matter how much I try to cajole, beg, plead, and cry for, just won't even they won't even address the idea of silver border cards because there are too many people who are like, I don't want to play with fake cards. I'm like, they're real cards. We own them all. Like, you can't tell me that all these dice rolling cards are bad when we've got Forgotten Realms and Baldur's Gate that are making you roll infinite dice with this. You can't tell me that Host and Augment don't fit in Commander when we've got like every
Mutate
bestow card and mutate and all this other garbage, meld. Like, come on, these things all. I mean, even like contraptions are entirely fine. It's the fact that there's like, yeah, they're like, but I don't want to put my head on the table and pretend I'm a zombie. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, if I take out like maybe 150 of the, like, if I give you half of unstable, the other half is totally fine to be lethal. Like, Earl the Squirrel feels entirely normal. It feels like an entirely reasonable card. If you put the stupid Scepter of Celebration or whatever on a creature, it's got Citizen Link.
Exactly. It's basically that. And that's one of the things that we've seen is the evolution of silver bordered cards. That line has been blurred. I mean, look at Unfinity, where they finally removed silver border from this. And a lot of those are perfectly playable cards, because what was silver bordered cards a decade ago, now we're seeing
cards
actually printed in black border. Like, we're seeing these concepts actually be rolled out as mechanics and actually be printed as cards. There are a lot of the dexterity based cards that I understand why we
like,
don't
I don't
want.
like dex cards. I understand. I would like, I have made a list of unofficially totally fine for commander cards that I should just publish somewhere. But it's like a Earl of Squirrel's fine, people. Let me just make squirrels.
Well, and I can absolutely see the sentiment of, if there are 150 dexterity cards that we don't want played, but everything else is fine, well, then we've got to put 150 extra cards on the ban list, right? And that starts getting pretty daunting for everybody, where it can be solved in a pre-game conversation to say, hey, I've got a silver bordered card in my deck. Are you okay with it? Yes.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Right. So you got to look at it both ways. Like, yes, the majority of players are not going to have an issue with you having silver bordered cards in your deck, but also solve it at a per game basis rather than a per format basis.
Right.
Makes
exactly.
sense. And I mean, like, this is me talking to Mr. Commander Advisory Group about opinions on the format, right?
Yeah. You know what, man? We've been friends too long to be able to sit and to handle that. But yeah, so like, roughly speaking, if I break this deck down, its main components are ways to protect Cadira, ways to make Cadira stronger, ways to protect my tokens, and then things that make tokens.
Yeah.
And I guess a handful of removal.
And in terms of the protection, you're pretty well covered. You got a bunch of what I call gotcha spells in here, right? You've got the Grand Crescendo. You've got the Flawless Maneuver. You've got the Rapid Vigor, right? Rapid
Vigor was one that I was not sure. I wanted to get your opinion on that one specifically, just because I was like, oh, Rapid Vigor is a cool card, but is it a cool card?
I personally love it. I think it is very, very underplayed. For a common, this one deserves spots in creature-based decks. It really does. Especially when you see a lot of green in particular, and their gotcha spells cost 3 a lot more times than not, or like whites cost 3. When you're looking for a 2-mana answer, you're looking at Heroic Intervention, you're looking at Rapid Vigor, and when you're looking at the price difference between a Heroic Intervention and a Rapid Vigor, where Heroic Intervention costs $15 and Rapid Vigor costs 2, there's a massive difference there.
I didn't know it cost $2. That's a lot for a common. Rapid Vigor, by the way, 1 in green, regenerate all creatures you control.
Yeah, but keep in mind that it's only ever seen.
My chair is broken.
2 printings, right?
Has it really only ever seen 2 printings?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's
it was in like Conspiracy, and I've got like a whole mess of them. Oh, I guess Conspiracy and Future. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Idea.
But that card is surprisingly good.
100%. And again, when you're looking at like gotcha spells like this, there's also and what's it? I'm gonna have to search real quick. It's Covert something. It's another one that was printed recently. Oh, it's not Covert.
Clever Concealment.
Clever Concealment. That's the one.
Yeah, 2 white convoke. Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out.
Yes. Yeah. And when you're going wide in a deck like this, that is a fantastic gotcha spell, right? Think of it as a localized Teferi's Protection that 9 times out of 10 you don't have to pay mana for, right?
Hmm.
It's those kind of things that are like, okay, in response to your board wipe, I'm just going to tap 4 of these bunnies, and suddenly everything I control is protected against this board wipe. Well, you can go a step further and you can cast your own board wipes and clever concealment in response to your own board wipes as well, and be perfectly fine too. That's what I mean about turning a board wipe asymmetrical. And for something that you don't have to spend mana on is incredibly good. Like flawless maneuver in the same sentence, right? If you control your commander, you play it without paying its mana cost. Great. It's a great little gotcha spell. Somebody tries and blows up your commander or your board, and suddenly everything's indestructible.
Sure.
So from a protection standpoint, I think the bases are well covered in the deck. It's great. You've got some great removal in here, like the classics. You've got your one-time removal spells like the Aura Mutations and the Path to Exiles in here, all perfectly fine. You've got some of your board wipes. You've got classic Austere Command against sculptable board wipe. You've got that Battle of Bywater in here, all incredibly, incredibly good. The aspects that I want to focus on here is not necessarily the core concepts or the groups of cards in here, like the pump up Cadira, let Cadira attack more easily. But you've really got to think of the logistics of in-game and casting spells in-game. So if Cadira is being windmill slammed on turn 3, then everything else in the deck that costs 3 mana is not going to be cast on turn 3. So looking at it as a viewpoint of, am I okay casting this on a turn 4 or turn 5?
Ooh, good question.
Right? So, there are a lot of cards in here that I'm okay casting on a turn 4 or turn 5. Beastmaster Ascension, right? It's 3 mana, but whenever a creature you control attacks, you put a quest counter on it. If it's got 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. That's something that can come down on a turn 7. You turn sideways and you win.
Sure.
Right? So that's a 3 mana spell that you are perfectly okay casting later in the game. Or a Champion of Landhold, right? Champion of Landhold, 3 mana.
That card is so stupid.
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Right. But whenever a creature comes into play, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and creatures with power less than it can't block creatures you control. In this deck, that's something that you're fine slamming on a turn 5 or a turn 6, and then having Cadira hit, make a bunch of bunnies, pump up Lamhold's power, right?
Yes.
All perfectly fine. But there are some cards in here where you've got to ask yourself, am I going to be okay casting this on a turn 3? Does this make sense casting it the same turn as my commander? Or am I okay with it coming down later? Right?
Right.
As much as Tireless Provisioner and Tireless Tracker are great, right? These are 1 token a turn, right? Unless you're ramping. Right? And there are a lot of people that might say Kodama's Reach and Cultivate aren't playable anymore, which is completely silly. But in a deck where your commander costs 3 as well, you're probably casting a Kodama's Reach or a Cultivate on turn 4, on turn 5, and they aren't making any tokens. So is that really the best use of those mana values?
Yeah, that was the thing.
Ramping into?
Right. I was having trouble. I was like, that's why when I came to that slot of the Kodama's Reach Cultivate thing, I'm like, this deck needs ramp, obviously, but is this the ramp it needs? You'll notice, like, I was trying to hedge the difference here with, I've also got Nature's Lore and 3 Visits in there. And I was like, okay, well, one of these packages needs to be here, but probably not both. Maybe Cultivate, maybe Kodama's Reach can be like left out because of the fact that, again, they're just too slow for the deck's goal here.
Now, I would say if your commander was mana value 5 or mana value 6, Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, perfectly fine. Right? Nothing at all wrong because you're still ramping before your commander comes down. But because they share a mana slot with Cadira here, you really need to be on that, okay, am I going to play this on turn 3 ahead of Cadira and then have Cadira come down on turn 4? Is this a matter where you've played a Mana Dork on 1 and then a Tireless Tracker or Tireless Provisioner on turn 2, and then on turn 3 I want to cast a Kodama's Reach so that I can have tokens, and on turn 4 I'm casting Cadira, right? So you've got to think about the sequencing that way. And if it's not going to
That's
be
a good
worth it,
point.
and you're going to be saying, okay, if I'm casting Cadira on turn 4, she's not swinging until turn 5. Is this 3/3 with trample going to get through at anybody if the first attack that she gets is on turn 5?
That's a I had not considered that angle at all. And that's actually a very important one because of the fact that, I mean, that's why you have other people edit your decks, right? Like sometimes you look at a deck and you're just putting cards in indiscriminately. You're like, this does a thing that's cool and I want to play this card and it's fun. And then when you actually try to do it and play, you're like, oh, this is never actually going to happen in the course of a game, or it's going to set me back in a direction that's just not where I want to be.
Yeah, so sometimes you build around the Christmas land scenarios, right? Where if this deck does everything perfectly well, then I'm including these cards for it, right? But sometimes you have to look at creating the average experience rather than building for the ideal experience.
Sure.
And this is what I tell a lot of people when they bring me decks that aren't doing the thing. If they have a deck that isn't doing the thing or isn't consistently doing the thing, achieving its thesis, what its main focus is, what its main success condition is, then you really need to build towards that being the average, right? Is your commander coming down on curve each and every turn? Do you want your commander coming down ahead of curve each and every turn? Look at your mana values, look at where your ramp is. If your commander is mana value 4 and you want it to be cast on turn 3 every turn, you need to be including that 2 mana ramp. If we want Cadira coming down on turn 2 consistently, then we want all of the 1 mana dorks in here so that we can be casting a 1 mana dork and Cadira on turn 2. Then we take turn 3 to make tokens, if that's the case. But if we want to make our tokens on turn 1 and turn 2, and then Cadira comes down on turn 3, well, then we need to build around that being our condition here. Our token generators, at least the one-off token generators, need to be coming down on turns 1 and turns 2. Then turns 4 plus, we do things like protect Cadira, make Cadira easier to attack in, or start building our bulk token creation from there, or our synergizers from there. When we start making tokens, what's synergizing off of those tokens coming into play? So if you break down your mana curve in terms of pre-commander and post-commander and what your goals are on those two scales, you're going to find that you generate an average experience for the deck that's going to be easier to do the thing more often than not.
That's such a good point. God, that's such a good point. Because I'm just chewing on this. Now I'm thinking about this curve where turn 1, Colony Garden, turn 2, hang on, this chair just dropped me, slowly flooding me into the basement as I'm thinking about little bunnies here. I really need to invest in a chair. People, please sponsor my Patreon. But yeah, I'm just thinking turn 1, Colony Garden puts out a plant token. Turn 2, you put out a forest or whatever, or a plains, and then you drop, I don't know, the Saproling Migration. Suddenly you've got 2 1/1 saps. So now you've got 3 tokens on the table. Turn 3, you drop Cadira. Turn 4, you can swing with Cadira and get 4 bunnies or 3 bunnies or something like that.
Yeah. Well, again, keep in mind turn 4, you've not cast anything pre-attack with Cadira, right? So you can suddenly be casting another 3 mana spell or a 4 mana spell or 2 2-mana spells.
Or putting a Swiftfoot boot and then equipping her.
Exactly. Or a Bloodforge Battle Axe on her, or Trailblazer's Boots, just to ensure that she can get in each and every turn.
Trailblazer's Boots, by the way, I think deserve a special mention. I don't think people play this card enough, which is just it's an equipment from Zendikar for 2 that equips for 2, and it says equip creature as non-basic landwalk. And we live in a time where every mana base is greedy as hell. This is just free unblockability, baby. It's it's right there. I do want to call out one other piece of tech that somebody introduced me to that I thought was absolutely hilarious. I haven't seen before because this card only had 1 printing. It's called Nemesis Mask. It came out in Mirrored In or Darksteel or something like that. It's a 3 mana equipment that equips for 3. And it says all creatures able to block equipped creature do so. And I was like, why would you do that? You don't want Cadira to die. And they're like, no, you doofus. You put this on one of the bunnies.
Yep.
And you swing in with a bunny, and suddenly their whole board is blocking this one little bunny, and Cadira is just walking in. And I'm like, oh, that is the sickest tech.
This is a reusable lure, right?
Yes. My God, I love that.
you and I going back to the days of playing Stone
Thicket
Tongue
Basilisk.
Basilisk and
Yeah.
Lure and everything like that,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Nemesis Mask is reusable, and since you're replacing the token that's going to eat all of the blockers here,
Mm.
every time Cadira connects, using that is basically everything else I control is unblockable every turn.
So good.
It's really good. It really is, especially for this concept, right? Like this
Yeah.
is how Cadira attacks every turn. This is how Cadira gets in every turn.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you some specific questions about cards so that we can kind of like just wrap up the general thing, because otherwise we're going to be here for days. Some cards I had thought about that I'm just not sure about. Bootlegger Stash. Remember, this was a card that was going to break commander by land you control can tap to create a treasure token.
Yeah, this one is really funny because this was the uproar about this of like
Oh yeah.
uh,
Oh my god.
this was at the height of treasure token generation. They revealed this card and everybody's like, we're so sick of treasure generation already. We're so sick of it. It's been a year and suddenly everything is creating treasures, and green in particular is creating so many treasures. I think that it's good if your deck revolves around making treasures. Right? Otherwise, it's coming down on turn 6, and suddenly you're tapping all of your lands to create this. This is one of those cards where if you have Academy Manufactor out, it's nutty. Like
Yes.
in this deck in particular, the ceiling on it, the value ceiling versus the value floor
It's
on
so
it
stupid.
is
It's
so high. But the value floor on it is you get an extra 1/1 bunny for each land you control. Right?
Which is still pretty good.
Still pretty good. Still pretty good. The whole thing is that it comes down late enough that if you're making that many treasure tokens and that many bunnies, you're probably
It's probably
looking
winning
at
the game, right?
it's getting late, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the game enders we're looking at here, especially if you can, tap your creatures to pay for the bootlegger stash and then tap your lands to create the treasure tokens and then replace all of the creatures that you just tapped with bunnies when Cadira connects. Again, I think that it is perfectly fine. I think it is the exact middle point between floor and ceiling in this deck and comes down late enough that it's not going to draw you undue heat anytime.
Man, you are not making it easy for me to cut things. I need you to help me cut things, not keep them.
And so there are a few things in here that I absolutely would consider on the cutting room floor, right?
Hit me.
There are some in here that are good but not incredible, right? Like Veteran Soldier, for instance.
Sure.
Right? Veteran Soldier is one of the backgrounds from Battle for Baldur's Gate, but it's basically dethrone on your commander and you make a 1/1.
Right.
Right? So, while it can be fine and whether it fits in our curve in terms of making tokens pre-commander coming down, it's still, in the long run, only going to make you 1 token every turn. And that's only if you're attacking the player with the highest life total every turn. So there's fair. A lot of ifs connected to that, in my opinion, would really remove it from the deck.
Fair.
Okay?
Now, yeah.
Another one that I'm really iffy on is Pest Infestation too. Right? Now, Pest Infestation is a double X and green. Right? And it's destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments, create twice X black and green pests that gain a life when they die. My whole concern with this is that, yes, you're making a bunch of tokens off of the back of this, but that double X is you paying 3 to destroy 1 thing. Right? You're paying 5 to destroy 2 things.
That's true. That gets really expensive really quickly, because like originally in one of my earlier drafts I had like Mirari's Wake or something on here so I could double my mana, but this is not an X spells deck, right? And I was just thinking about like Pest Infestation from the general standpoint of I'll make some tokens or whatever, and I mean, you're right, it's not the best disenchant. There's probably better out there.
Well, I mean, looking at the difference between Aura Mutation and Pest Infestation in this deck, again, the ceiling on Aura Mutation is much, much higher than on something like Pest Infestation, where Pest Infestation, to get the number of tokens that you'd be getting off of an Aura mutation, you're looking to pay 7 mana in order to hit that
Sure.
number, right? You're making 6 tokens by paying 7 mana.
Sure.
Right.
Oh, that's much better. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are some higher mana value spells in here that are great. Like I would say anything that's over 6 mana in a deck like this really needs to be something that is going to make a massive impact on the board, right? Like Ancient Gold Dragon, you get 1 attack with this thing.
It's so good.
So good, and it is ridiculous.
Like, I love that card.
All of the Ancient Dragon cycle is incredibly good. And it's fun rolling dice. You roll that D20 and you hit a high number, and bam, it's like you hit the jackpot in Vegas.
Oh yeah.
Every time. But something like a Hornet Queen, as good as Hornet Queen is for us older school Magic players, look at it very fondly. When you're looking at paying 7 mana and you're making just a handful of tokens off of this thing, probably not where you want to be for 7 mana in this deck.
But it's Hornet Queen.
I know. I have the new promo Old Border Italian version that they were giving out for game days in store, and it is so beautiful that I want to put it in a deck. But in a deck like this, again, you're looking for volume, you're looking for quantity when it comes to that mana value and these kind of tokens, or you're looking at something that really juices your tokens.
Sure.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in here, and I can understand why it's a kill your darlings kind of scenario.
Yeah, but I mean that's also fine, because like one of the other secret rules I had for this deck was like I don't want to use cards I'm using in other decks. Yeah. So that's also like I didn't put a lot of the standard token doublers in here. Like I don't have Doubling Season or Parallel Lives or whatever the heck. And I've got a Hornet Queen in other decks, so I don't mind not having it, because like one thing, it's so easy to fall into this making a trap where you're basically building the same deck over and over and over again with a different leader at the top. And I'm like, I want to try to use cards I don't use. Yep. Right. So being able to like take out Hornet Queen, like I love that card, but I want to play cards I don't play.
Yeah. And I have this personal exercise where I try and keep exactly 1 copy of every card. That way, if I'm building a deck that wants that card, I have to choose which deck that 1 card is going to go in. And that way, it's which deck does this belong in? Do I have to split resources across these decks? Or it's that wake up moment of, oh, I'm just creating the same deck that I already have because, there's 6 shared cards between this deck. Am I just building the same deck in different colors or overlapping with the same colors? So I totally get that sentiment from you. But also I am looking at the new O'Hare Talk as well, and being like, okay, what deck can I put this in? Or I'm looking at a Mondrak Glory Dominus and I'm saying, okay, well that fits in here along with the Anointed Procession.
I definitely put O'Hare Talk in here. And yes, I've got Anointed P in another deck, but also I don't care. This deck was totally made for that card.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I put O'Hare Talk in here just because it would be hilarious. I left Mondrak out because I thought it would be too much. Like you don't want that many doublers. It's weird coming from me who runs like all of them, as many as I can all the time. Yeah. But I'm like, it's fine. Let's be judicious here.
When you and I jammed in Vegas and I was playing my food deck, that's a deck. It's a Naya deck that has every single token doubler in it, and it's overkill once you get 2 out, right? Once you get 3 out, once you get 4 out, you're having to pull out that calculator and you get into an 18 Academy Manufacturers scenario where it's just like, okay, let me pump the brakes on this game so I can do some math, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. Like there's a point where you're like, okay, you know what? Let's calm down. It's fine.
Exactly. Now, when we're looking at some of the cards in this deck and some of the cuts for this deck, I would really say let's start with 3 mana, because looking at the curve overall, you have 32 cards in the deck that are 3 mana, and those are conflicting with Cadira first and foremost. So take a look at them and say, if I cast this later in the game, am I okay with that? right? And I immediately go to Awakening Zone as one of those. This one isn't doing it for me. Like a 0-1 spawn later in the game just isn't cutting it in terms of value overall.
Fair. I mean, I could put in the other one, the 4 mana one what the hell was it called?
The only reason to run that one is to tutor up an Eldrazi with it, right? Like that's the 4 mana sacrifice.
I like running them in Nethroi because it's super cute to mutate onto a 0-1 Eldrazi. But and that way, when you try to steal it, I can just sack it for mana and get all my things back.
When you try to steal it, he says, knowing that everybody is going to try and steal it.
Dude, look, that deck is called All Eggs in Your Basket for a reason.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Now, you have we spoke about previously Thraben Inspector in here, right? These 1 mana come in, make a tokens associated with them. It's like the Kellen 1 mana adventure.
Yeah.
Now, we just had revealed from the new Murders at Karlov Manor, we're getting another Thraben Inspector.
Yeah.
It's the junior detective.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Right? But that's another 1 mana enters the battlefield, makes a clue. Right. Just meaning that when Cadira comes down, you're going to have tokens to make more tokens with. I think all of those, great, absolutely fantastic.
So, like, that's I should probably put Gilded Goose back into the deck, huh?
Well, yeah. So Gilded Goose is a great example of if it comes down early, it does the thing. If it comes down late, it does the thing. Right? Because coming down late, you're going to have the food to sacrifice and you're going to be making other food tokens to sacrifice to it. It's great. And it makes food on its own too. So these are all things that whether it comes down early or it comes down late, it's valuable. It does something. If it comes down early and you don't use it as a mana dork, it's created a food for you to make tokens with Cadira. Again, all good things.
Fair.
Yeah. And, looking at some of the inclusions, I can absolutely see why you've included them as like the ceilings for this deck, like Duelist Heritage, for instance. Right?
That's there because it both makes Cadira really good. It's a good political tool and a card that I just mean to play and keep forgetting to play with.
Yeah, it is one of those like, okay, if I give your creature double strike at the beginning of combat, what do I get for that? Right? Like I like that as an interaction card, but at 3 mana as well, this is also one that I would be okay casting on turn 4.
Yeah.
Right? Or you cast it on turn 5, give Cadira double strike. That's what I mean about looking at these cards that share a mana value with Cadira and say, am I okay casting this on turn 4? Am I okay casting this on turn 5? Tokasha's Welcome is in the same boat. Right? Tokasha's Welcome is the 3 mana enchantment that says when 1 or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Triggers only once each turn. You cast this on turn 4 when Cadira is getting in for that first attack. You're drawing a card off of it. Works perfectly.
And the trick is I also put in Tendershoot Dryad and the white Tendershoot Dryad, which hits on every upkeep. So you're always going to be drawing cards.
Yeah. And along those lines, I hate to give you a card to add in along those lines, but I really like Welcoming Vampire along those same lines.
I forgot all about that, dude.
So Welcoming Vampire is the 3 mana power 3 or less, enters the battlefield, draw a card, happens once per turn.
Oh, that's a cute one. Yeah. Good point.
Right? Because in green and white, you really don't have a lot of good straight card draw options. Right? Like you have Collective Unconscious in the deck, which is 6 mana, draw a card for each creature you control. Great. Absolutely fantastic. Right? Like
I found an 8th edition version sitting at home, so I was like, I'm going to use it.
Beautiful. But like that's one of the scenarios where it's like, okay, I'm okay taking a turn off because I'm going to draw 100 cards off of this. Like I'm going to draw 30 cards off of it.
Exactly.
That's perfectly fine. My only thing would be like, hey, if this were an instant, it would be better, but beggars can't be choosers when you're drawing 30 cards. Right. If you draw 30 cards, you keep the 7 best of them, you're in a good position. That's what I say about people who always jam the Reliquary Towers or the Thought Vessels in their decks. If you're going to draw more cards where you need to be discarding to hand size, and you can't decide what 7 cards to keep, should probably revisit your deck list and say, well, if I can't keep the best 7 cards of the 50 that I just drew, what am I going to do?
That's fair. Like, I mean, like when I was pulling cards aside for this, I was also thinking things like Battle Screech. Look, it makes tokens. It's like a one-time 4 tokens or whatever. I mean, that's cute. It's not important. Like this can be like slimmed down quite a bit. But you know what, though? We're at 140, and I'm going to call this here because otherwise we're going to have a problem. It's funny. Before we started this, and this is a true story. Before we started this, my wife was like, because we're recording this earlier than I normally record these. And she's like, oh, how long is this going to be? Is it going to be an hour or is this going to be one of your multi-hour ones? And I'm like, oh, this is casual. It's not Shivam and Wheeler. It's only going to be an hour. It'll be fine. She's like, I don't know. There have been times on casual where you and your friend have just gotten in the sauce and I haven't seen you again all evening. And I'm like, this won't happen. It'll be fine. Here we are with the longest episode of Casual in a minute.
Look, when you and I get to talking about deck building, and specifically when we talk about some of our favorite cards in here, the spice must flow, my friend. And there is no brakes on this train.
Yeah, but you know what? We're going to break here because otherwise I'm going to get broken. So with that, though, you know what, friends? When this show goes live, I will have a link to my finished deck list, and I will probably have it in Chicago with me just because it'll be super neat to do. I'll probably just keep talking to my dear friend, the mechanic, here afterwards, just so you can trim this down some more. But in the meantime, man, thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. It's been lovely. I love talking to you.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for having me on again.
And if people want to find you, where can they go?
Oh, you can find me everywhere content is made. Search Commander Mechanic on any platform. Look for the orange wrench, and you'll find me doing deck techs, tune-ups, deck building advice, and podcasts with cool people.
And as always, my friends, you can find me at Gear Report Gears. You can find this podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at Cool Stuff Inc. every Tuesday, or at YouTube every Tuesday, thanks to my new editor, Daniel May. You can also find me on Shivam and Wheeler Love Magic, and you can also find me on the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast because I'm building the Shivam podcast network, basically. And if you want to support me directly, you can go to patreon.com/ShivamB and hook me up so that I can buy a chair that does not drop me off screen while taping. That is real embarrassing. But remember, my friends, it's not magic without the gathering, and we'll see you next time.